meeting. Still comment. Okay. Okay, I think that means we have quorum and Member Cal will join us in a couple minutes, so I will call this meeting of the AVA Executive Board to order. City or Clerk, can we please have the roll?
Yes, thank you. Member Hugh?
Yes.
Thank you. Member Cobb? Member Marquez?
Present at the Hayward location listed on the agenda.
Great, thank you. Member Bouch? And Chair Tiedemann.
Here,
We have a quorum.
thank you. We will now move to public comment. Do we have any folks wishing to speak for public comment?
So,
Yeah, I figured.
sure. I will preface by saying this is the strangest public comment situation that I've been in. COVID is weird. Okay, so hi, my name is Ayla Peters-Pass. I am with Local Clean Energy Alliance. I am here because I would like to bring attention to the topic of resilience hubs in the Bay Area to AVA Community Energy. Over 30 Bay Area community groups are urging AVA to invest $15 million from the 2023-2024 budget surplus into community resilience hub needs, not limited to solar and storage. As we know, climate crises are increasing. They will continue to get worse, and there will be an increased need for emergency services. And we are currently approaching summer wildfire season. California is also predicted to be at risk of year-round wildfires due to climate change. Therefore, emergency needs are more important than ever. AVA has already allocated $2 million for technical assistance for renewable energy for resilience hubs in the 2022 budget, but there's no clear path for use for those funds. And we urge AVA to expand investment to other resources for resilience hub needs. We understand that the draft budget has the draft budget is an estimated 250 surplus. We asked for 15 million to be invested in a community resilience hub program beyond the critical municipal facilities program. Across the Bay Area, there's a variety of resilience hubs that have already demonstrated an incredible amount of support and services for disenfranchised communities. For example, Lincoln Square in Chinatown, as well as Rise Youth Center in Richmond. These often serve severely under-resourced communities with basic social services, and as well as other resources such as wildfire relief, clean air during poor air quality days, and disaster preparedness, backup solar, etc. More funding would mean that this would offer more robust disaster infrastructure, increased community services, and increased climate resilience for communities that need it the most. So we would like to urge AVA to prioritize environmental justice, low-income communities, and their resilience hub needs, and to expand funding to cover other urgent resources. I'm good on time, and thank you.
Thank you.
Great about that.
For your comment.
We have two more public comment. ECC Bay Area and then Susan Silber. ECC Bay Area, recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Jennifer Lomelli, and I'm with Emerald Cities Collaborative Northern California. We appreciate AVA Community Energy staff's proposal to include community-based microgrids for resilience hubs in the surplus budget allocation. In addition, our community-based organizations also urgently need resources for resilience hub community organizing and planning, extreme weather resources like cooling centers, air filtration, and other daily operational needs like refrigeration. We really need AVA Community Energy to invest at least 15 million for community resilience from the 2023 to 2024 budget surplus to create an equitable process where community organizations can work towards having disaster plans in place, support operational staff and volunteer coordination, and developing sites to include microgrids of solar and storage to keep the power on during unforeseen crises. AVA Community Energy estimates millions of dollars in surplus funds, and since this is the money we pay as a community to this agency, we need the agency to act on its promise to invest back into the community it serves. Emerald Cities Collaborative supports the East Bay Clean Power Alliance and the 32 organizations that are calling for these resilient hub needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Silver, Susan Silver, you're recognized for 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm Susan Silver, the project director for an organization called Collective Resilience based in Berkeley. Our mission is to help resilience hubs evolve and flourish. I've been doing a lot of work over the past several years to support resilience hubs, including developing a network of sites with the city of San Leandro and research on schools as resilience hubs. And I really appreciate Ava Energy for helping to sponsor a 3-part workshop entitled Building Momentum for Resilience Hubs that I'm helping to organize that has 240 people registered. I've seen such a huge enthusiasm, support, and need for resilience hubs. We really appreciate Ava Energy's proposal to include community-based microgrids for resilience hubs. But we're asking that you invest $15 million for resilience hubs from your budget surplus because there's so much need for resilience hubs. And I want to be clear about the definition of resilience hubs, that it doesn't just include microgrids. It's one that is very holistic, rooted in community-led programming. There's a commitment to programming that's focuses on building trust and relationships, social cohesion, mutual aid for vulnerable residents, and food distribution. And these programs won't just magically won't magically appear, that we need funding, we need community organizing. We urge you to fund a coalition work to build a network for this important work. Urge you to fund not just the microgrids, but the programming sites, and urge you to consider a separate fund for the smaller sites for, grants up to, let's say, $20,000, $50,000, because this funding is very hard to get for, this type of funding is very hard to get for the smaller programs and sites. So really, we're at a make or break moment in history here when we need lots and lots of resilience hubs everywhere. So really urge you to think outside the box, think holistically beyond just the microgrids, the infrastructure, and understand that the co-benefits of resilience hubs are enormous, and really urge you to support them with $15 million investment. Thank you so much.
Thank you. If there's no further public comment, Jessica Tovar.
And I just want to echo all that was said around the resilience hubs, because that is very, very much important. I wanted to address the other issue that came up at the last board meeting in regards to taking PG&E's Diablo Canyon nuclear energy. And one of the things that I wanted to highlight was just kind of some of the history around that, because I do remember it was about 3 times within the year 2020 during the pandemic where this issue came up. The first time was in April. There was an outpouring of community support against taking Diablo Canyon nuclear. And fortunately, the board agreed with the public that day, and then there were attempts to get city councils by Ava Community Energy staff, specifically City of Hayward. I think Albany was also included in that. And I remember Hayward actually rejected taking the nuclear. And just to highlight that, many, I would say some of the cities within the territory actually have resolutions as nuclear-free zones. And then just recognizing that back then we didn't want, one of the things that we highlighted was the potential extension of the power plant. And I do recall that what was said was that the energy was offered for free. But there are a lot of things that we're forced to pay by the investor-owned utilities, by corporations like PG&E, including the many, fallouts from like wildfires, gas pipeline explosions, many that are actually very devastating and have actually killed people. And we're forced to pay for these things. At no point do we have a say, especially with the actions that the CPUC takes in favor of the utilities. And so just because we're forced to pay the PCIA and other costs is still not an argument to take an energy that distracts from the fact that we need to be investing in actual renewables of solar and wind, and that the commitment of the agency was to do so. And to actually take nuclear energy really is a backwards, I would say, a backward step. And certainly no environmental justice organization would support that. If that allocation includes the hydro, we were actually okay with you all taking the hydro. But we made it pretty clear that we didn't want to take nuclear energy. And this has been discussed this year by the Community Advisory Committee, which was opposed to the idea. That's it.
Thank you. Are there no further public comment at this time?
Thank you. With that, we will move to our first substantive agenda item, which is approval of the minutes from our March 6th meeting. We did not have an executive meeting last month, so this is our last one. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Moved by Supervisor Marquez. I will second. Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Great, thank you. Dudlin,
Yes.
Oakland, Alameda County,
Yes.
Pleasanton, Albany.
Yes.
Minutes are approved.
Thank you. With that, we'll move to our draft budget review, and this is an informational item. Who's making that presentation?
I'll be presenting on that, and as you can see online, we have Nick and Jason with us. So I'll walk through the presentation, and I think collectively we can address any questions or comments that come from the board.
Great.
Adrian, if you can pull up the budget deck. So we have presented this in a similar manner to what we've done in prior years, and from a process standpoint, this is in line with what we've done, which is reviewing the draft budget here throughout the month of May. For this year, given just sort of how the schedule lines up, we'll be doing this initial review with the executive committee today, of course. Next week on May 8th, we'll do that with the Finance, Administrative, and Procurement Subcommittee. And then for the first time, the full board on May 15th, and then plan to bring it forward in June as we typically do for formal action. We have a few additional slides this year, just sort of set up a little bit of sort of background on rate setting and some historical trends that we've seen. That was a request from the board to just sort of walk through some of the basics of how we index our rates before jumping into the actual budget presentation itself. So there's a few slides here on that topic. So if you can go to the next slide, please. A little bit of basics of energy delivery. I won't spend too much time on this, but AVA as a load serving entity schedules our forecasted load on a daily basis with CAISO. We do that on a day ahead basis. That's what it's sort of formally noted as. And then when actual load comes in, it is balanced on a real-time basis. We then layer in, and when we schedule that load in, everything clears with the CAISO, and then we layer in our hedges of various forms on top of that to really manage the risk associated with that scheduling process. Next slide. Here we've showed a little bit of historical trend really since our agency's inception on our AVA related rates. So you can see that I'll jump to that sort of bottom left graph. In dark blue, you can see AVA average rates. Of course, that there is variation across our various rate classes, customer segments. On the pink is the PCIA fee. That is what customers pay directly to PG&E as the power charge difference adjustment, aka the exit fee. That is not paid directly to AVA, just to highlight that. And then you can see the green line is a general reflection of our cost of service and how that's trended up in line with rates increasing. And then lastly is margin or really net position. So that is the differential between that cost of service and AVA average rates. As we all know, we indexed our rates to PG&E. We have done that historically. Bright Choice is currently set at a 5% discount to PG&E, and Renewable 100 is at a 1/4 cent premium to PG&E rates. So that's you can see the historical trend there, which I think is interesting. Obviously, in our first 4 years, relatively stable, a little bit of an increase, in the last 3 years is what we've really commented on consistently here of late, which is a rising energy price environment, and really driving some affordability concerns for our customers. At the bottom right, we don't need to walk through every portion of that, but that's CAISO NP15 prices. So that's sort of the closest reflection of our clearing prices. Technically, ours are PG&E DLAP, but NP15 is the sort of the liquid price that CAISO publishes and is very, very closely correlated. And you can just see the general price volatility that we've had over the last 5 or 6 years. In particular, 22 certainly has a sort of anomalous price spike, and you can see how that sort of the black straight lines are annual averages, how that is generally increased over the last several years. Next slide, Adrian. Thank you. I won't go into this in too much detail. I think this is sort of general background on the billing cycle itself. I think the emphasis here is really just understanding some of the working capital and cash impacts of actually serving the load, issuing bills, and then receiving payment, and how that needs to be managed as we look at budget as well. We don't focus too much on cash, but it is something that I just wanted to emphasize and kind of lay out as a basic overview. So I'm gonna go by this slide. I shouldn't say last, but next slide, please. A little bit more on revenues and rates. I touched on this a little bit, but a little bit more history. So for Renewable 100, as I noted, we're currently priced at a 1/4 cent premium to PG&E rates. When we launched our operations, we were set at a penny premium to PG&E, and that's gradually migrated down over the years as we've been able to build up a surplus and had more sort of operating headroom in terms of net position. Bright Choice has seen a similar-ish trend, a little different. We launched with a 1.5% discount to PG&E and actually reduced that as margins got very compressed in that 2021 timeframe. And then since then, we've seen an energy price environment and therefore PG&E rates increasing, which has given AVA a little bit more flexibility in managing with a stronger surplus. And with that, we've had an increase in those discounts to 3% in 2022, to 5% in 2023, and ultimately what we're proposing here is a 7% discount to PG&E for this budget year, which of course we'll walk through in more detail. The bottom left graph is just a breakdown of who's on the amount of load that's on Bright Choice. We've split that between residential and C&I in the dark blue and the light blue. And then you can see Renewable 100, which is also broken out residential C&I in light green and dark green. And you can see that sort of increased over the last couple of years. The line is the percentage that's on Bright Choice. And you can see currently in 2024, that's about 70% of loads on Bright Choice, 30% on Renewable 100. And in 2025, that percentage goes closer to 75%. That's driven by the fact that Stockton and Lathrop will begin serving next year. And the assumption is that they will be on Bright Choice for their default service. And then a couple bullet points there are just sort of to help indicate how much that each percent discount to Bright Choice translates to from a revenue perspective, and therefore in terms of net position. So every 1% change in Bright Choice is roughly a $7.2 million impact to revenue, and that is also a direct impact to net position. And then similarly for Renewable 100, every 1/4 cent change equates to about a $5.3 million impact to revenue and position. Typically, those are things, of course, that the board likes to discuss in terms of various scenarios. So we've included that information here. All right, we can move to the next slide. And from sort of here on out is very similar to how we typically present the budget draft. I think the main points to note here are we are continuing to see a rising energy cost environment. They're at historically high levels. We've talked about that. Historical energy prices are for sort of brown power around $40, and we're at sort of double that, just in comparison. We are seeing a slight softening of energy prices for 2025, and even now through April of 2024, we're seeing that as well. Just generally milder temperature conditions that are largely a factor there, and some increased capacity build out for generation coming online as well. Those are sort of the macro dynamics feeding into that, but generally elevated prices relative to historicals. As a result of that, rates have generally increased. PCI has generally decreased since 2025, but I would say there's a little bit of a stabilization between 24 and 25 for this year, where there's no material adjustments to rates coming down modestly, PCIA going up modestly, calendar year 2025. I think the other points, I'll maybe jump to the last set of bullets there, is we are proposing in this sort of base case draft and increase the Bright Choice value proposition from a 5% discount to a 7% discount. We are recommending a very similar reserve allocation to what we've done in the current fiscal year, which is $100 million in the waterfall distribution, and then a similar waterfall in terms of the budget surplus as what we've ultimately had board approved this past January. We are increasing the carbon-free energy procurement targets. We are proposing a similar local development budget, and then some expansion on staff as we've seen in previous years as well. Adrian, to the next slide, please. This is really the main summary snapshot. You can see with the left column, that's our fiscal year 24-25 budget, sort of draft budget base case. And we've compared that to the fiscal year 2024 budget. And then unfortunately, the Zoom is sort of blocky, but the last column there is our fiscal year 2024, our current fiscal year actuals. So you can see how that compares to budget. And then the variance that we're showing both in dollars there, as well as the percent, is a variance between our fiscal year 25 and our fiscal year 24 budgets. And we'll walk through each of these sections as we do in the following slides. But at a high level summary, we are continuing to see a strong financial position. It is slightly softer than what we forecast into the budget for this fiscal year. The net position is roughly $153 million. The last budget year was roughly $205 million, both very large numbers. Our actuals are actualizing a little stronger than that for this current fiscal year, which is about $225 million. But we have seen quite a bit of variability there, sort of $20-30 million range, plus or minus, based off of energy prices. Just giving you a sense of the order of magnitude variability we're seeing. I've touched on the value proposition. I've touched on cost of energy. We are proposing 15 additional full-time staff members in terms of personnel costs. We do see some higher non-operating revenues for our treasury management, which we had recently approved as a higher interest rate environment. Local development estimates are slightly lower than last year. Yeah, I think those are the main high points for this slide. Adrian, if you can go to the next slide, please. Also included in the base case assumptions, I'll jump through the value proposition, which I've noted now a few times. We do have a $50 bill credit applied to the Care and Fair customer segment. We have been able to do that the last 2 years, given the strong budget surplus. And so that is included this year as well. And that is, as usual, would be typically issued in the beginning of the fiscal year with certainty there. Other on-bill credits are through the budget surplus waterfall, which would happen at the end of the year, which we'll also detail out a little bit more further in the slides. We assume the rates for 2024 unchanged. 2025 have touched on sort of modest changes to 2025 rates, slight softening of rates because of slight softening of energy prices. And with that, a slight increase in PCIA. And that's what's primarily driving a little bit of a lower net position, but it's generally stable. Same uncollectible rate that we typically forecast, which is 1%. We are not proposing any recognition of the GASB 62, which is a deferred revenue account. And not too much material issues to comment on the non-operating revenue. For energy costs, the carbon-free procurements, we are proposing 81% carbon-free, which is both the large hydro and the renewable energy components at 81%. You can see in parentheses, the first number there, 71%, is what was sort of board approved in a prior schedule. And we've included a 10% adder there for 2025 as a calendar year. 76% was the original approval, and we're proposing a 5% adder there. So both would sort of stabilize at 81%. Yeah, let's continue to move forward. Adrian, on the next slide, please. Thank you. There's just a little bit more detail on the carbon-free procurement. Obviously, with the strong net position, I know this is an area that the board always likes to dive in. You know, what are the opportunities to potentially accelerate some of that carbon-free procurement? You can see the top table to the left is the original board approved schedule, and that I think that is iterated once or twice, so that's sort of the latest formal approval. And then year to year with a strong budget picture, we have typically accelerated and increased some of those numbers. And so that bottom left table sort of summarizes those changes that we've made the last couple of years in terms of increasing the scheduled procurement targets. And as I've already noted, what we've proposed here as the base case is for calendar year 24 and calendar year 25, the large hydro and renewables would total 81%. And so we sort of have some stability. The reason we've done that is to have an even number there between the two calendar years, which tends to just be a little bit more simplistic to manage, but obviously we can have that conversation with the board of any interest in toggling some of those things. And as we all know, there is a meaningful item coming in May related to nuclear that may also speak to some components of this. So we've left this without too much change as a result of that. Adrian, next slide, please. We're on slide 11 now. This speaks to reserve amounts. You can see the table to the top right, a little bit of an eye chart, but that shows our historical allocations to reserves. Again, it's a little cut off here, but the second to last right column says OpEx to cover. So that is a forecast of our total annual operating expenditures for the next fiscal year. So our reserve policy targets a 50% reserve percentage as a percentage of that OpEx. And so that last column to the right just shows that percentage of total balance over that forecasted annual OpEx. You can see in the 23-24 contribution year, that's the fiscal year that we're currently in, our budget has approved $100 million reserve allocation. We are forecasting there's no material risk to that number, so we do anticipate that balance at the end of the fiscal year will be around $331 million, and that will allow us to hit roughly a 40% reserve percentage. And then the last line item there is what reflects this current budget cycle, which is the 24-25 fiscal year. We are proposing a similar $100 million reserve allocation. We see that modestly increases the reserve percentage to about 43%. And the big driving factors, as we're serving Stockton and Lathrop, our annual operating expenditures increase pretty material to about $1 billion. So yeah, the numbers are increasing certainly as a primary driver. The bottom half of this speaks to the budget, the waterfall that we've had now the last couple of years, which is to sort of set a net position that's fairly high, have a meaningful reserve allocation, in this case, $100 million. And then we've had certainly active discussions here over the last couple of years on how to treat that waterfall. What we have proposed here is in line with the latest kind of mid-year approval in January of what to do with this current year's fiscal period. So half of that would go to on-bill credits, half of that would go to the solar storage net billing tariff incentives. That's the same incentive program that we've been talking about of late. Slight adjustment because the January approval was for a 60-40 split. For simplicity, we just put it at 50-50, but obviously we can alter that as the board directs. The last comment I'll just make here is the reason we've kind of proposed these numbers in general is, certainly we feel that there is a benefit in increasing the value proposition in its base case. At $139 million of net position, that's still a very strong position. And we have maintained a sort of a consistent reserve allocation in terms of this recommendation. The remaining roughly $39 million that we are forecasting right now, we feel like it's best to have that in there because there is quite a bit of variability that we see in terms of energy market prices year to year. And so that amount is roughly 5-6% of our energy costs. And we feel like that is a reasonable amount to say, let's have that in the buffer. And certainly if that actualizes, fantastic. We've got that funding that will go to on bill credits and incentives. There's certainly a potential that that could result in a lower number and those figures would be smaller. And of course, in the same manner, it could increase as well. And we are seeing that in this year's budget forecast. And so that's roughly how that is sized. Next slide, please, Adrian. This is a little bit more detail on the operating revenues. I've touched on the value proposition now already, so I won't really harp on that. I've touched on the assumed $50 care fare on bill credits that would happen in the base case. And so you can see a breakdown there. Operating revenue is approaching $1 billion. The uncollectibles amount there, about $10 million is roughly 1%. And then other operating revenue, that is actually a forecast of our on-bill credits, I believe. So that's what it's a relatively modest number, about $7 million. So that's what that number reflects. Adrian, you can move on to the next slide from there. Operating expenditures, we will go into each of these categories in a little bit more detail. So this is the high level summary of all operating expenses. You can see, of course, as usual, the cost of energy is really the primary driver there, about 90% of overall operating expenses. We have cost of energy services, really our main that billing and data services, so that number is fairly stable. We have overhead operating expenses totaling about $45 million. That's sort of a modest increase, more or less across the board on what we've seen, but we'll walk through that in a little bit more detail. And then non-operating expenses, borrowing interest, which is our credit facility, and then local development funding. Local development funding, we always put under non-operating expenses. You know, practically speaking, they are operating expenses, but because it's a capital transfer and we maintain those funds regardless of how that's spent over the course of the year, that's why it's listed in that separate category. Next slide, Adrian. This is a little bit more detail on the energy expenses specifically, totaling about $750 million on the cost of energy services, then about $12 million. And you can just see a breakdown of some of the different energy products. You can see our PPAs is a very low number, and the primary reason for that is because our PPAs are really in the money, so they net out costs and value that we have in those contracts as hedges. It's not really a reflection necessarily of the amount of load that we serve through our PPAs. And then our hedges tend to be short-term hedges. That's the reason why that is typically always the largest bar. And then you have our open position, which is unhedged. Some of that open position is managed from a risk perspective in terms of the PCIA, because PCIA will rise and fall, and that will have an impact on rates the following year. And so that open position is not necessarily a true reflection of the risk that we have, but it is a reflection of the cash flow risk that we have annually. Then we have capacity, which is resource adequacy, RECs, and the smallest bucket there is carbon free. So in line with what we've seen year over year, but a sort of modest increase across. Next slide, Adrian. This is a little more detail on the overhead expenses. Again, the total is roughly $45 million. And you can see how that compares from a budget perspective and an actual perspective for the current fiscal period that we're in. It is a modest increase on the budget, and typically we see that the actuals come in quite a bit lower than that. Part of that reason is because personnel, we always forecast a full year so that we can manage the timing that we bring in and recruit new personnel. Certainly that's conservative because there's no ability to bring everyone on day one, of course, but it's important to have some level of flexibility there, of course, to manage that recruitment cycle, which is in some ways becoming more and more challenging given the amount of people that we're looking to hire. Marketing expenditures is a bump up there. A lot of that is driven both by a combination of some of the rebranding efforts, but also largely out of the local development programs. We're looking to sort of step up some of those marketing activities for this current period. Some of that was recently discussed and approved by the board. Legal and policy, a modest increase there. We do have some, some items there related to litigation. And otherwise, we, have a lot of council services that we generally need for our PPAs and local programs. Other professional services actually decreased a little bit, and part of that is a reflection of the growing staff. G&A is generally in line, and depreciation, material there, comment on it. Adrian can move on to the next slide. We now go into each of those overhead buckets in a little bit more detail. I'll try to move quickly, just looking at the clock. Personnel here, as I've noted, we are recommending an additional hires of 15 FTE. That is directly in line with what we've done for this current fiscal year. You can kind of see the distribution of that largely spread across the organization, but a heavier concentration in local development and power resources. As we're adding on more contracts, you can imagine that takes a lot of personnel to manage that. More programs and services that we're looking to offer under local development. There's concentration there, particularly with DC fast charging program, and then under power resources, mostly contract management personnel. So as we're adding in more PPAs, there's more amendments, there's more workouts, there's more settlements work related to that. So that's most of that concentration. And you can see the split of where that, those salaries and wages are sort of broken up between a COLA adjustment, 3%, promotions and wage adjustments, which is fairly modest at 2%, and then a merit-based compensation around 13%. The note there is the kind of the balance there between wage adjustments and compensation. This past year, we adjusted to try to standardize our wage levels across different bands so that there was less sort of discretion and variation across how those salaries were set. That was in part to address some DEI bias, perhaps unconscious bias in the sort of negotiation and salary setting process. So we felt that it was best to really standardize that. And that's the reason why that 2% is a fairly modest level. And we're trying to put a little bit more in sort of merit-based, incentive-based compensation, being a little bit higher. I know that is not the norm for public agencies, but we felt that this is a good performance-based measure. Next slide, Adrian. This is on non-operating activity. There's nothing too material here. You can see certainly an increase in interest income, and that's just a reflection of a rising interest rate environment. We don't typically predict that very well, quite frankly. Most folks don't predict interest rates well. And so you can see that's why budget had that at a fairly modest level. Actuals are significantly higher. Additionally, we have approved our treasury management policy and have a third party managing that. So we do anticipate that to continue to increase a bit as well. On non-operating expenses, you can see borrowing interest is a reflection of our credit facility that we have with US Bank. That is, just as a reminder, $200 million credit facility that is generally underutilized, and that's as expected. A very low interest rate on that credit facility, negotiated at a very favorable time. And so it's a bit of a working capital insurance policy. Where we do use that is generally for postings of letters of credit, things like that, fairly low cost. And then, of course, as I touched on, local development funding, similar level to what we did this past year, a little bit of a modest decrease. We'll talk about that in a little more detail on another slide. It's been challenging to actually spend the money, quite frankly. It's difficult to really do that in a very responsible manner, make sure that we're issuing the right RFPs, finding the right consultants to do that work. So there's a modest dip there, but we are maintaining a similar level. Next slide, Adrian. This goes into the local development budget in more detail. You can see the various programmatic areas that we've proposed for this particular draft budget cycle, totaling $22.4 million, and sort of a direct comparison of what we've done for this current budget year. I'm sure we could spend quite a bit of time on this. JP was earlier, and Annie's here, of course, so we can speak to any details there. But for the sake of this presentation, I'll keep it brief and just sort of let folks look at the various line item breakdowns. Obviously, rank order from highest to lowest, and we have an additional contribution towards critical municipal facilities, which is a program we are currently continue to actively work on with our city members on various sites and with counterparties to build on those municipal facilities. Kind of work your way down and healthy communities. Additional allocation of $5 million there. We brought an item recently to the board on sort of contractor selection there, and the DC fast charging network additional allocation, $3 million. Previously, we had $30 million allocated in that bucket and sort of on down the line. I'll move, yeah, actually, that's our last slide, so I will stop there. And
Thank you very much.
That's
Uh,
all.
that's all.
Yeah.
I know that was very
Pretty
fast,
simple.
rapid fire there. So
We appreciate the speed. Do we have any questions from board members? In the room? Go for it.
Thank you. Sorry for late. So a few questions. One, on the very last, can you bring up the last slide? Where it
the
had
local development slide.
Yeah. Do the what we're generally calling resilience hubs, they fall under one of those categories?
It falls under the solar and storage incentive program, which has a current allocation from this fiscal year, both from the surplus. Well, I guess it's from the
just
surplus,
surplus.
yeah. So at the end of the year, we will see how that number actualizes. And we'll end of the fiscal year, and then we'll do the audit, and those funds are being allocated to solar storage incentive program that includes a resilience allocation.
Correct.
So we're not. Go ahead.
So there's a number of things. So we have a Resilience Hub RFP that is soon to launch. So that is more of this sort of organizing and sort of fact finding, helping to create a channel or a pipeline for these resilient hubs to then apply to the funds for incentivizing solar plus storage. So that is about 300K, but that's in the current budget. There's also 2 million in the current budget for additional technical assistance for those resilience hubs. So essentially, once a site is identified, there's technical work to be done to assess, okay, what size system, how do you get it built, what upgrades are needed. So that 2 million is also already in the current fiscal year budget. And then the critical municipal facilities, those microgrids, those are in essence resilient hubs as well. Those are municipal facilities. We have a portfolio of roughly 60 different buildings throughout the service territory that we did we approve that the last board meeting? Or are we
No,
taking
not-
it this year?
Yeah, I think it's coming up here
Coming
shortly.
up
but
is
not
the,
yet.
we're very close.
Yes.
To bringing the final agreement to the board for the developer who will support the installation of those 60, the portfolio of 60.
Okay. I remember correctly, is that including, we also reaching out or have we included like school district facilities, not just city agency?
I believe, this is where I wish JP was here. I think Felice is actually on the call. Sorry to put you on the spot, Felice, but I know you've worked on this. If you could unmute her, I believe, okay. Are you there, Felice? Okay,
We can always follow up and
I
determine,
can
does
follow
that
up.
include or exclude schools?
Yeah, and I know we're not including NGOs, non-public agency institutions,
correct.
which I disagree with. I think we should, but nevertheless, if we're gonna just include government, that could also include school districts, and whatnot, not just cities,
I mean-
The one clarification I'll make is that $7 million has other budget allocated to it, and that is specifically on critical municipal facilities. And then
Correct.
the other line item for solar and storage center program, that is.
Dan?
That is-
I can speak to this.
Okay, thanks, Nick.
So if you recall, the critical municipal facilities program is structured to be largely cost neutral. The $7 million here is to cover some of the grid services costs, but that should be offset with value. I think we're still in our sort of phase 2. When we think about the expansion in phase 3, I think we are looking at school districts as one of the eligible customers. But this is focused on executing on the 60, 70 sites we currently have in phase 2.
okay, yes, but in the next budget, which we're about to adopt, we're not adding in money for like a.
No, Dan, no.
Yeah.
The budget for this next year is to help cover the costs for the 60 or 70 sites we have in phase 2. In a future budget, we might seek funds for a phase 3, but we're not there yet.
That's within the 7 million.
Correct.
Okay, so will the staff report for that at the board meeting kind of go into detail, or?
About the like what is in the portfolio?
Yeah, in other words, what are we spending $7 million on? What we're, yeah. But my question, if that can be answered without too much or extra work in the staff report, so people.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
Next question.
Can I also, one
Yeah.
quick clarification? I didn't touch on this, but it's definitely noteworthy is you'll see at the bottom of the left-hand chart, there's the $22.4 million, which is budget allocation. That does include an ongoing incentive payment related to the solar storage program that we recently discussed. And then on the bottom there's a potential to S&S, which is solar storage incentive program, which is that $19 million is from this fiscal year. So that's what we're forecasting from the budget surplus that will get actualized by the end of the fiscal year, communicated in the October-November timeframe. That number will fluctuate a little bit. And then the line item under that is the estimated surplus related to this current fiscal year. So
Understood.
So I just wanted to, I guess, detail those additional.
Okay, a couple more questions. So how much outreach do we do to recruit more Care and Fair customers, to invite more Care and Fair customers? Because PG&E doesn't do a very good job. What do we do? I don't know.
Want to
If
speak to that?
Yeah. So we've done a few campaigns. I think the most effective one was we worked with our data team to build a propensity model of those individuals based on zip code and other demographics that we think were likely to qualify, but were not enrolled. And so we did very targeted direct mail and email. And it was very low cost and had a great return on investment. So we are running that campaign again actively currently. But what is unfortunate is that to qualify for care, you have to have exceedingly low income. And so it's really those folks just above the care limit that, we would love to reach, but they don't qualify for care. So, but we do outreach to either, to encourage people who we think could qualify to get on that program.
And the fare is a little
Slightly
above
higher.
Yeah, right.
But it's still,
Not
you have
bad.
to be exceptionally low income.
For the household, or for just the ratepayer who's on the bill?
It's the household.
The adults in the household.
It is a number of people in household is the way FARA works, yeah.
Oh, I see. Totally. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. Next question. Thank you for continuing that outreach.
Yes,
And then so you had a reducing the value proposition, 7% discount from PG&E, right? And then having the Renewable 100 be a $0.25 premium. Is that what you think?
Correct.
So what if we were to accept Care and Fair get 7% discount? What if everybody else got a 6% discount and we reduced the premium even more for Renewable 100?
So we've been going through a pretty extensive exercise to do sort of the cost service analysis to determine what's the appropriate differential between Bright Choice and Renewable 100. I think there's one comment is there's more work to be done there. Part of that reason is two big factors, one of which you're of course familiar with is other big cities opting out. So Fremont, Oakland, and certainly others that are not currently on 100. What is the dynamic of having such significant load to switch from Bright Choice to 100? Suddenly switch the amount of renewable energy that we need to procure, and what does that do from a market perspective? I've commented at a high level, renewable energy credits are already at sort of a 5-fold multiple of what they historically have been at, and when you start procuring another terawatt hour, 2 terawatt hours of additional PCC1 that may blow out far beyond that. And so I think there's when you look at the cost differential, I think it would be appropriate to maintain where we're currently at. And actually, we've increased that differential slightly because of increasing the Bright Choice, at least the recommendation, 5% to 7%. And so I think if you start to sort of compress that, it's not necessarily an accurate reflection of what it is to actually serve those customers.
I don't disagree at all, and I'm okay with it being. I'm okay with non-Care and Fair Bright Choice customers slightly subsidizing Renewable 100 people. I think that's a good environmental move to make.
And maybe let me just interject that I think um, the idea that we are starting to cross subsidize one rate class in such a sort of explicit way raises some pretty significant equity questions. One, and also there's some legal questions that I think we need to be aware of. There's currently a legal challenge in place at Central Coast Community Energy around some of the structure of their local programs because they don't reflect cost of service. So as you know, like for EV Mud, you would not be able to cross subsidize. There's a strict legal requirement that EV Mud's rates are cost of service, so that if you live in the Oakland Hills, your rates are higher than if you live on the flats because of the cost of pumping. When we start to move into a world where we're explicitly saying certain rate classes are more or less expensive, not because they cost more to serve, but because we're making a policy decision, we are wading into, I think, some tricky legal territory. And then, there's the underlying dynamic that, we have 70% of our customer base on Bright Choice. The reality is the communities that are currently served by Bright Choice are on average lower income than our Renewable 100 cities. I'm greatly uncomfortable by it, but of course this is a board decision.
The other dynamic I would note is we've done that analysis on a base case. That's with our current load split. As you start opting up a terawatt hour, 2 terawatt hours, perhaps even more if you're talking about trying to bring renewable energy pricing down. Unfortunately, that just increases the differential.
More people who sign
The more people that sign up, the more that marginal cost is to actually procure, because there's a supply shortage. Yes, in the short term, of course.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm just throwing it on the table because I think part of our goal, our founding goal, is to promote more clean energy, better than PG&E, which we are. And I think one way is to do what I just suggested, which is which is not a huge change, but it's something. And it's not like, the PUC has created these greenhouse gas adder calculations, and so it's not like we're doing something completely off the wall. It's like trying to be consistent with state goals, state greenhouse gas goals. So anyway, for consideration.
Any more questions?
Yeah.
Great. Supervisor Marquez?
Thank you so much. Thank you for the presentation. Can someone share with me, I believe we added maybe 15 to 17 positions in last year's budget. Is that number accurate, more or less, if someone can answer that? And if so, how many of those positions have been filled?
Yeah, I can speak to that. I believe 13 have been filled, and I think 2 are outstanding and currently posted. I may be off by 1, maybe 12 and 3, but
Okay.
those are posted roles that we anticipate filling here over the course of the next couple of months.
Okay, and then what is the costing for the additional 15 positions? Is it close to 2 million? I was trying to do the math really quick, but then that slide changed.
Yeah, again, the way we approach it from a methodology standpoint is we assume sort of full year's salary. So that is a conservative approach, but it is roughly $3 million.
3 million. Okay. Okay. And then did I understand correctly that we're going to be increasing purchasing more carbon free up to 5%? That's being proposed in this budget as well?
That is correct. For 2024 fiscal year, there's the back half. We've maintained the sort of increase that we have currently in our budget year, which is 10%. So it goes from a 71% target as board approved to an 81%. So that's for the remainder of this calendar year. And for 2025, it is a 5% increase, going from 76% to the scheduled 81%.
Okay, and then piggybacking on the conversation with regard to the community resilience hubs. So what I'm understanding is what we put in place, it is a phased approach, and is it staff's idea that once we get information back from the RFP, the work being done with the technical assistance group, we could see basically what our options are in the community? And are there plans to expand that next year? Are we looking at the information we gather this upcoming year to make an informed decision, or how does staff see? Because I definitely would want to see us increase capacity, but I know we're we're basically in this kind of exploratory stage to see what our capacity is.
Yes, so definitely the work that we're doing around the grants and the technical assistance is intended to develop that pipeline of potential resilience hubs. There is already an allocation of the incentive funding that is part of this surplus allocation for the current fiscal year. And so we can look at that, and if that is getting drawn down very quickly, there's no reason we couldn't add more to it with the board's
Okay.
approval.
Are we hearing any barriers from accessing those funds from the community? Are we aware of any barriers?
I mean, just sort of the standard, the cost is high for solar and storage. We are offering higher levels of incentive for the resilience hubs. And so I think that is sort of the appropriate market barrier that we can address. There are, of course, other barriers that are outside of the energy sphere.
Okay. So one is to close, go ahead.
I was just saying, just to be clear, we have various approvals for initiating that incentive program, but we are still operationalizing and implementing that as there's quite a number of factors in terms of, you know, what is the data platform that would actually allow a battery, for example, to integrate with our utilization, go marketing it. So there's quite a bit of work there. So I just note that because I think the barriers are still to be seen in terms of how quickly the adoption can be. They're not, it's not as if the program's available today and people aren't interested or noting anything. So we have various hypotheses,
Correct.
but you know, we are yet to really fully test it.
Okay, and then what are we doing around the work of the uncollectibles? How are we handling that?
Sure. Lately, we approved a slightly amended collections policy. And then we also proposed a process for you know, seeking collections from, you know, to effectuate that policy. Jason, maybe you can speak to just the status. I think we're issuing an RFP here shortly.
Yeah, that's correct. We're going to be issuing an RFP for recovery agents, and we are going through the process of writing off those that qualify that with that status.
Okay, great. Those are all my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Member Hugh, do you have any questions? Go for it.
Okay, thank you. So I have a few questions. First one, I want to ask, for compared to Bright Choice price, we use, hold on, let me get to that page. So we use like 5 to 7% discount, and compared to the renewable, we use specific, like how many dollars or cents we save. Why we use like different ways, not use percentage for both of them, or use, you know, like dollars for both of them.
I think she's asking why we have a percentage discount for Bright Choice, but we have a volumetric premium for Renewable 100. Why don't we?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Well, I mean, the legacy behind that is because we looked at pricing for renewable energy credits when we launched our services, and that translated to a penny, a nice round number. And I think it was somewhat of a marketing approach of saying that's easier to sort of communicate to a customer as opposed to a percent, where customers don't actually necessarily know what the rates are. And so saying a penny was sort of a nice way to sort of communicate that and perhaps help facilitate more opt-ups. But I appreciate maybe the logic of these are a little bit apples and oranges in terms of actual metrics. So you certainly could consider reevaluating that, but I think it's mostly for customer engagement purposes.
Yeah, I agree. I think the penny makes sense to customers. So maybe change that Bright Choice in the future also to the cents, just to make it consistent, like easier to understand. That's my suggestion. It's a minor thing, but I think it just make things consistent and make customer easier to understand. So I just moved to my next question. So I have a question about the programs. I say we have, just 1 second, I'm gonna move, checking my presentation here. So 1 second. Okay, so we do have a transportation electrification program, $2 million to like an e-bike incentive program, and $1 million to EV charging. I want to understand a little bit about these two programs and how our community members can apply for those programs.
You want to speak to it?
Sure. So I would say over the last several years, we've been piloting and learning things. And for this year and going forward, we're really building the pipes of programs to start to get higher volumes of incentives and other funding out into our community. And so the money that you pointed to for the e-bike program, that is in addition to funds that were allocated in previous budgets and for a program that we hope to launch before the end of this calendar year. So that's not yet available to our residents and customers, but will be soon. And that is incentives for purchase of e-bikes. For the transportation, I think you were referring to the DC fast charger. Thank you.
EV managed the charging program.
Oh, EV managed charging. Similarly, this is something we're building the pipes, so the structure of the program to get this. In this case, it's not incentive money. It would be dollars to support a partner who would then enroll customers, and there is a small like enrollment incentive for customers. But then that through this third party, we would have the ability to manage when these vehicles are charging, and in that provides us a lot of benefits on the sort of energy side of the business, but it can also provide savings to our customers. So that one is also sort of a continuation of funding that we have requested in years past or in last year, and we are actively building that and also hope to launch that. We have a lot of things sort of scheduled to launch in the last quarter of the calendar year, so we might have to space these things out. But that is within the next fiscal year, we would be launching that program.
So when you launch those programs, like e-bike will be the program for individual residents. They can apply, right, for the rebate or whatever you call this, right? And for this EV charging will be like a commercial space.
No, it's primarily for residential. So,
It's also for residential.
correct.
But you said that it's more like a management of EV charging, like reach out to customers.
Correct.
Oh, okay,
It's
got it.
commercial from like an implementer standpoint, we may engage with a third party to aggregate customers, but the
I see.
customers themselves are largely residential.
Okay, so when you have a programs launch and things will be kind of on the website and will be marketing to the individuals so people get a chance to learn what's the program. Oh yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Any more questions?
That's all. Yeah, thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank you. I've got one or two. To go back to the rate setting, I know we discussed the reasoning for the percentage. Can you speak just a little bit to the process of why we're going with further decreasing relative to PG&E rather than not pegging our rates to PG&E anymore at all? Because I know that was a point of discussion at one of our last budget discussions.
I guess
Board.
two big comments there, and welcome Nick's thoughts on that as well, if you want to chime in. One is that PG's rates are generally set on a cost of service basis.
Mhm.
So in many ways, we are a cost of service entity as well. We may have modestly different cost of service structure given our load is more coastal and generally milder, but actually as you bring in Stockton and Lathrop, it actually sort of shifts the average a little bit more in line with PG&E. So I think it's appropriate to say that by indexing to PG&E, we are maintaining a cost of service approach.
Mhm.
Then the question is, how do you layer on certain budgetary needs on top of that? The big thing that we allocate to is reserves. And so I would say that's the big factor, that we continue to put fairly strong funds there. It is in line with our reserve policy, which is targeting that 50% with a range of 25 to 75%. And I think we are likely, needing to come to the board here, hopefully sooner rather than later, because we're starting to approach that 50% number on saying, is this it? Do we stop here? Do we now allocate funds towards other areas? Do we just continue to decrease the value proposition? Or decrease the discount, increase the value proposition, to be clear. And I think there's also opportunity to discuss adjustments to our rate structure. Again, I think our view is that we are under a cost of service type model because we're indexed to PG&E, which is strictly cost of service. But I think there's always an opportunity to adjust that rate structure a little bit if we feel like there's some meaningful benefit there. The challenge there, that we've kind of noted this in the past, is the T&D rate structure is not gonna change. So if we change our generation rate structure, it only makes it more challenging for customers to understand the bills where they're already having a fairly challenging time understanding their bills. And if what we're trying to do is incentivize certain behaviors around when you use your energy, when you charge your vehicle, having two different rate structures actually somewhat kind of conflicts with that messaging and ability to communicate. So those would be two reasons why we wouldn't want to modify our rate structures. But I would say that we are under a cost of service structure. It's just that we are right now prioritizing allocation towards reserves amongst some of these other sort of surplus waterfall areas.
Great.
We are also participating in pilots through PG&E and the CPUC and the CEC for day ahead real-time pricing, which is dipping our toe into the sort of real-time pricing pool, which we'll learn a lot from that. But I have a lot of concerns about customer understanding of that pricing structure.
Yeah.
And we've seen in other places in the country where that has not been good for customers. Yeah.
Appreciate it. Another on, I think it was slide 10, we showed our sort of carbon-free percentage, and I think I know the answer to this, but just to confirm, the latest forecast of that shows that we're staying at 81% for a couple of years. I assume that's basically the impact of adding Stockton in 2025 of, we are adding more renewable energy and carbon-free energy there, but we are also adding a lot more demand there that we have to fill. Is that right?
That is correct. And just to know, I mean, what we've put there on the 2024 column is, and then when you look to the left, the years reflecting 2024, we've increased the 71% to 81% target based off the last fiscal year budget, and we're maintaining that, but that is an acceleration. And then for 2025, we're bumping it by 5% to 81%. We've listed 2026, but certainly we're not assuming we're not going to change 2026.
Right.
I think we're just listing that purely for visibility to see how that currently is forecasted. But of course, in next year's budget, we may propose accelerating that as well. So I wouldn't say that's a very conscious effort to say we don't plan to do that. We'll see how the budget looks, and we'll of course bring that forward for discussion at the appropriate time.
Great, thank you.
We lost them.
Hopefully we'll get it back. And then on the resiliency hub issue, just to clarify, because we discussed this at our last executive meeting, we are in the stage of the process where we have an RFP, or we may not have even launched that RFP yet, to find a service provider to help us basically design that program and get it out there, correct?
Was that the managed charging program? Is that what you said?
No,
The
so
solar
it's,
plus
Oh,
storage, the
sorry.
resiliency hubs.
So JP, you want to come join the table? The RFP is not so much to design the program. I think for the incentives for the solar plus storage for resilience hubs, that will be part of the solar plus storage program with higher incentive levels for resilience hub. The grant and the technical assistance is to basically help those individual locations develop the projects and then apply for those incentives.
Right. Sorry,
Okay.
to rephrase, basically someone to help us administer that program, right?
Yeah, to administer the incentive program, we're planning to bring that contract to the board at the May meeting for approval. So that's the company that would help us administer the solar and storage incentive program, actually give those incentives that would be including, individual residential customers as well as resilience hubs with the higher incentives for those resilience hubs. So yeah, that, and then we, need to bring that to the board, get that approved, sign that contract in order to then launch the program as Andy mentioned later on in the calendar year, so that those incentives are available for a resilience hub to come and apply for that funding.
Right. So no matter, if there is interest in having more money for resilience hubs, no matter what amount of money we want to put in solar and storage, we're at the stage where no matter what, we need to do that first step of getting that person to help us administer that, and then we have plans to do all these other things, and we can discuss, the amount of money going to them. But this is the step we're at now. Yes,
That's correct. And we've got the approved budget surplus from this last year already set aside for those incentives.
Great, thank you. I don't have any other questions. Hugh, is that a new hand or an old hand? I think it's old.
So it's old hand, yeah.
Great, no worries. With that.
I have a
we'll
quick
go-
comment.
Go for it.
Thank you for your chair for your clarifying question. Would it be possible to get a status update, maybe on a quarterly basis, on how things are going and rolling out the incentive and the programming? Just want to make sure we're closely tracking that. So whether that's in the CEO's report or wherever appropriate, just a touch point every few months, just so we can track how that's moving along.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we will go to public comment.
We have one hand raised, Jessica Tovar. Recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you. Yeah, I have several comments on the budget. The first is in order to include folks that are on CareFair and AMP, it would be really important to continue funding community-based organizations that facilitate the enrollment in CareFair, AMP, and the LIHEAP programs, to continue giving funds to Spectrum Services, who administers the LIHEAP program. One of the biggest barriers to these programs really is language access, and that's a repeated issue. You all created a great program thanks to our advocacy back in 2021, but one of the criticisms I have is these programs should be ongoing, not just once. So you should be actually funding these things annually. The second part is under community grants. In your local development business plan, the whole point of community innovation grants was to reach community-based organizations with the seed funding that's needed for community innovation. That has since ceased since the one time given in 2019. The current community grants line item has been really used for marketing of agency programs. So there's been no response to actual community needs. So that's a huge criticism on our part. The $1.2 million towards community grants is actually really low. You could definitely do better than that. The grants that have been given out, again, that have been really towards marketing existing programs from the agency, have been 3-year, multi-year grants at $100,000 per year. That's great, but we've been advocating for smaller grants to reach small community-based organizations. 50,000 sounds like a great number. It'd be great if you can do that multi-year as well. And as far as the resilience hubs, one thing that keeps coming up is that this agency doesn't have a definition. The community actually has a definition of resilience hubs, has shared that during public comment as well. It's more than just the microgrids and the solar and storage and incentives. It's actually helping community-based organizations get to that point. There are some very basic and immediate needs that I've been hearing from community-based organizations, like mobile sources of solar-powered devices that can be used by the unhoused community on a day-to-day basis, but could also serve in the face of some kind of power outage for whatever reason. So I do think that that it would be nice to have this agency respond to community needs for once. And so that's what I'm asking you to do today.
Thank you. There are no further hands raised at this time.
Okay, I'll bring it back to the board. Are there any members who want to comment?
How with the community grants, the 1.2 million, are we spending that down every year, or does that money tend to carry over?
The funding that we got last year was for funding the program multiple years. The goal is to give about 1.2 million a year. We can certainly look to speed that up if we're getting more grant applications to the solicitations, but we've issued 3 solicitations and plan to issue 2 more before the end of this fiscal year. And so we're continuing to kind of issue different, solicitations per some of the feedback we got from the community meeting we had in June on identifying grant opportunities.
Okay, so are we looking at decreasing the minimum threshold to make it more accessible to folks? Is that
so far, the grant solicitations have been per the guidance we got from the board when we kind of set aside the funding for the grants, which is at the multi-year, so 3 years and around $100,000 a year. We have not yet kind of reduced the grant sizes per that community feedback.
Okay, and I'm definitely open to revisiting that and, we'll defer to staff as to when would be the good time, when are we gonna reassess the outcomes of that program? I hear the comments with respect to just wanting to invest more in disadvantaged communities. I also agree with the issue with language access. So I think we just need to make a little bit more effort in making sure that we're targeting the population as well. So any ideas from staff on how we can get to that? I'm open to hearing that.
Okay, I think we can take that and come back to you with a response there.
Thank you.
Member Marquez, I agree with that. Any other member comments? Room? I'll add, on the staff positions, I think when this comes to forward, it might be helpful to know what we're hiring for. I'm always very excited to see us expanding, especially when, some of the things we've run into is that we have capacity if we want to do a lot of stuff and we don't always have the capacity. So I'm happy that we are hiring more. It might be good to know, where we're expanding and where we have more capacity. Otherwise, thank you for the presentation. I think it looks good. And with the questions we've asked in the direction, I think it'll be even better when it comes back to the full board. Great. With that, we will move to item 5, the Power Source Disclosure Program Annual Report. Who's making this one? Great.
Hello, everyone. My name is Izzy Carson. I'm on the Power Resources team here, and one of the
Also, just a note on time, so this is important, but certainly just be conscious of that.
Okay, for sure. One of the areas I'm responsible for is the Power Source Disclosure Report, or PSDR filing. This presentation was put together out of a board item from last fall related to the power content label and preparation and verification of the power content label, and then of course the underlying data, which is the PSDR. So we'll go through quickly regulatory background, a little bit about the PSDR program, and then really dig into how the PSDR filing is prepared, verification, and then the options that we have for compliance. So high level regulatory background, the PSDR program was established in 1997. There were a couple of assembly bills that followed modifying the reporting requirements under the program. Those were implemented effective in May of 2020. One of the changes to the program that was made in 2020 was change the verification requirements. And we'll dig a little bit deeper into that in a little bit here. Just wanted to highlight that. So the PSDR filing is an annual report. It's due June 1st every year. All LSCs are required to submit this report to the CEC. It discloses electricity purchases for the previous calendar year. Again, the June 1st filing, there's a little bit of a delay because the previous calendar year, it's already a 6-month delay by the time this filing is due. It's reported as megawatt hour by generation source. That's rolled up as a % of total retail sales by product. We have 2, of course. And then the second component to the PSDR program is the power content label, which is also an annual requirement that is designed to give consumers an easy to follow breakdown of the energy sources for the retail plan that they're on and where their electricity comes from. And it allows consumers to compare their power content to the total California mix as well as other electricity providers. Next slide. And then of course, how it's prepared. There are 3 really main pieces that go into the filing. RECs, megawatt hour carbon free, and then the retail sales by plan. Retail sales are validated twice going into here. So first by our provider SMUD, and then the retail sales then go through a second reconciliation process through our accountant Maher. They are our source of record for our compliance filings. So what they confirm up to the second round is what is included in this filing, and then what gets rolled through all of our other compliance filings. The data verification piece is kind of where really the meat of the filing starts. We use Regis, which is an independent tracking system for RECs. They are responsible for actually creating the certificate. They also assign a unique identifier for each REC. There's underlying data that's attached to each REC as well within Regis. So it's the generator, the technology, the vintage, which includes the month and the year, obviously the seller, and then the certificate and this unique identifier that they attach to it. I have to review every invoice, or sorry, every contract that we enter into for the calendar year, compare that against the invoices, the RECs that we received under those contracts. There's a separate sub account created within Regis to hold each REC for every contract, for every transfer that's come in. We also use the carbon-free megawatt hours as compared to invoices and contracts as well. And then all of that information is exported and we begin to populate the actual PSCR template, which is a standardized template that the CEC provides on an annual basis. Again, the underlying data from Regis, so the vintage, the technology, generator, all that's put into the PSDR template. We then match all that data with a renewable generator ID, a CARB ID, which includes the emission factors that are specific to technology and then the resource. And then all of that kind of rolls up into the actual PSCR filing. There's an individual template that's populated per product. We designate each of the RECs towards one of our individual products, and then what comes out of that is the PSCR filing. That then goes through an internal review, both through several members of the executive team and the marketing team, checking content of that, and then when they get to a place where they're comfortable with the review, that then goes through a submission process to the CEC. They do a separate review. Again, this filing goes in June 1st. The power content label doesn't get sent out until October. So there's several months of where the filing is in kind of a draft status before the final power content label goes out in the fall. Next slide. Before 2020, all LSCs were required to submit an audit. This changed when those regulations were updated in 2020. They've also submitted an audit prior to that change. But that change allowed public agencies the option at that time of submitting either an audit or a self-attestation to satisfy that verification requirement. So since the 2020 change was implemented, we as a public agency have moved forward with that self-attestation each year. Just highlighted here an excerpt from the current code regulations that show the option that we have to either do the audit or the self-attestation. So retail supplier is a public agency providing electric services, not required to comply with the subdivision A1, which is of course the audit requirement. The board of directors of a public agency can submit an attestation of the veracity of each annual report and power content label for the previous year. So that's the direction that we've gone in the last several years. Next slide, please. So again, the two options that we have for compliance are one, that self-attestation, or two, to engage with an auditor. The self-attestation is a board item that typically goes to the board in September prior to that final power content label going out. It's board obviously hasn't had the chance to review every line item of that filing, but they're testing to the best of their knowledge that the filing was complete and prepared according to the regulations of the program. That's a similar attestation that an executive makes on the filing when we file it in June, that to the best of their knowledge, the filing was complete and prepared according to the regulations of the program. If there is any additional information that we can provide or assist with the review, we're happy to do that as well to assist in the comfort of making that attestation. The other option, of course, is to engage with an auditor. Similarly, they'll be reviewing the underlying data to test to the best of their knowledge that the filing was complete and prepared according to the regulations of the program. We did reach out to the auditor that we had engaged with previously, and they confirmed that the cost to audit this particular filing would be approximately $4,500 to $6,000 per product, so up to $12,000, given that we have two different products. And those are the two options. I think this is last slide. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. Any questions from board members? Line in the room,
I have a question.
go for it.
Have we done a survey of other CCAs to know whether or not they are selecting the auditor or the self-attestation?
We haven't done an extensive survey of all the CCAs, but my understanding, after speaking with the auditor, is that they are aware of two other CCAs that engage with an auditor, and that the majority of CCAs, following that change in the regulations, opted to go for the self-attestation route. But I don't have a firm number done by a survey, no.
Okay, so I'm actually leaning towards the audit just because I feel, just for full transparency, being thorough and just knowing we're doing everything above. I think it's important. We obviously have the financial resources to invest in this cause. So that's something that I'm in support of option 2.
Thank you. Any other questions from members?
Yeah.
Go for it.
The power content label that goes in once a year, is that something that we have to do with PG&E, or ours just our own label? We just do our own label as required under state law, goes in the bill.
It is our own label, but there's a joint rate mail that also includes that, right?
Yeah, so it is, the joint rate mailer and actually the draft content label does have a comparison against the California mix, so PG&E's mix is included in there, but it is our own label. That filing deadline is October 1st. I think it's worth noting also that the Regis platform specifically has been having some challenges with their software, and this year in particular, there will be a delay on both the power source disclosure filing and of course the power content label as well. The timing isn't quite certain at this point, but just kind of worth flagging that. And I
Regis,
wanna-
just to be clear, is the accounting system that tracks all renewals.
Yeah, sure.
Just to clarify, there's 2 compliance notifications that we're required to send out to our customers. The first is typically sent by July, and that is the joint rate mailer. And the joint rate mailer, like it sounds like, is a comparison of our rates to PG&E, and it's a highly prescribed, templatized notification. So it's us and PG&E, it's co-branded, but it also has the draft power content for us compared to PG&E. But it's even noted on there that this is draft and won't be approved by the CEC until later. These things were created at a time when they were useful. They've evolved to maybe be less useful. So that is the first thing we have to get out. And that, because it's a July 1 timeline and we have these issues with, everybody has these issues with Regis, we're looking to request an extension. Then the power content label has to be sent to our customers by October. And the label itself is our comparison to all of California. So the joint rate mailer is us compared to PG&E. The power content label is us compared to California. But that is the one where we can also do more marketing, but like within the label section itself, that's very prescribed.
And that go for customers that get a paper bill, it's paper insert. Customers who get an email bill, is that email?
We do, it's never as a paper insert. It's either a hard mail postcard for the joint rate mailer or an email. And the power content label, we've done it as like this multi-fold, very attractive thing, hard copy or email.
Got it.
Yeah.
It's also on our website too.
It does. Yep.
Thank you. Any more questions? Seeing none, we'll go to public comment.
There are no hands.
Seeing no public comment, we'll bring back for board discussion. I'll just say I would agree with Member Marquez. The self-attestation would be easier, but I remember last time we did this, we had some members of the board who said, well, why are we doing this? Because we don't actually, know this in and out. We haven't looked under the hood. So I think it would make everybody probably more comfortable if we went with the audit. Any other board comments?
Is that the direction that we should just go ahead and do an audit, or is there any reason or need that you would want us to bring this back to the board for a formal action on determining the option?
The dollar amount's not big enough to worry about the boards.
Yeah, I would be fine with you just continuing as is. Is there any objection to that?
No, none at all.
Continue as in, let's do the audit.
Yeah.
Audit, yes, without bringing it to the full board.
Okay.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, we will move to item 6, committee member and staff announcements, including requests to place items on the future agenda. Are there any members who have requests or announcements? Seeing none, we'll go to staff. Any?
I just wanted to note that we issued a press release last week about 2 what I think are very significant and exciting milestones. So the first is we have surpassed $100 million in savings for our ratepayers and customers. And the second is that we've reached 1 gigawatt of contracted new renewable energy. So this is an incremental difference that exists because of AVA Community Energy.
Woo.
Yeah.
Very exciting.
Big
Thank you for
milestone.
sharing.
Congratulations.
Any future agenda items from anyone? Any members of the public who want to speak on this item?
There are no hands raised at this time.
Seeing none, we'll move to item 7, which is adjournment. Thank you all for joining us. We are adjourned.
Thank you, Chair. Bye, everyone.
Should I end it here?